sound, this rumble, and this mass cloud coming at us.
Our objective was clear. The cause was just. Our NATO allies and partners rallied beside us.
The Taliban wants to make a deal. We'll see if they want to make a deal. It's got to be a real deal.
So we went to war against al-Qaeda to protect our citizens, our friends, and our allies.
The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation.
Welcome to the Awakening Entrepreneur podcast. Today, we're going to continue our special series called Awakening Beyond the Veil. And this is episode 2 on the hidden truth on war. You know, when I was going through my awakening journey, the first thing that kind of really disrupted me was how the financial system and money really played in our life, and how everything that I've been taught in my schooling, including doing an economics degree, is just man, I thought I knew all about how money, financial system, and the economy worked, but in fact, I just did very, very little. And which goes hand in hand with today's topic, the hidden truth on war. Because why a lot of war happens, on the surface, is fighting the bad guys, as we've been educated with Hollywood through a lot of the movies, good guy versus bad guys. But going through my awakening journey, I started to realize the truth is not as obvious, let's put it that way. And one of the first revelations for me was September 11th. I remember exactly where I was when I realized that the planes hit the Twin Towers. I was in Vancouver, Canada at the time, and was about to fly to New York a few days later, maybe 2 or 3 days later. I was scheduled to go there for my first visit to New York by myself, and then the plane hit. And I was just glued to the TV. And eventually, when US is invading Afghanistan and hunting for Osama bin Laden, I was yeah, go get them. These guys need to pay, and these Al-Qaeda, and these bad guys, these terrorists, we need to eradicate them. Pretty much in line with the mainstream media. And then eventually, it wasn't long after, it was the war on Iraq. Man, the Saddam, I remember the jokes and the memes going around, if you spell Saddam's names backwards, it's mad ass. Man, this madman, we need to get rid of this person. I was very pro-US, pro-Australia, and pro the alliance policy. These bad guys, they need to be destroyed. So when the US, with each missile launching into Iraq, I'm cheering, yeah, go get them. With each explosion, it's almost again watching good guy versus bad guy, in a movie. Even though lives was destroyed by innocent civilians, and even if they're soldiers, they're still lives. I didn't care about it. I just wanted our side to win. So there was a huge division in my thinking. And back then, much as I like to see myself as a caring human being, I didn't see the world as one. And even now, you could say that I still don't, because what you consider as one and how you act is all relative to the person next to you. Compared to some sages and sticks and monks, I'm probably very divisive and seeing a lot of separateness compared to how they see lives. So I'm not judging anyone, because what I'm saying is that I've been there and how blinded I am in just having a very singular perspective on how this war and what goes on in this world, how the world really operates, and through the war machine. So one of the first truths that came in lines together with the first episode, the big reveal, is the trillions of dollars that were spent on the military by the US just prior to September 11th. Donald Rumsfeld was talking about $1 trillion just unaccounted for. It just goes missing. And the next day, the evidence seemingly could get hit by the plane, and where the evidence was being stored and that they could locate the $1 trillion, it goes missing conveniently because the evidence is now destroyed. You can't find it. How do you lose $1 trillion? I understand if you lose a dollar or two, especially if the country you're at, they're using little coins, you can lose it. But how do you lose $1 trillion? But then that kind of started the hunt of what really went on in September 11th. Most people know like the Twin Towers got hit supposedly by one plane and the next plane. And the whole narrative that the whole building went down, like just crumbling down like a cookie, like a demolition. It didn't go sideways, it just neatly going down. It looks very much like a demolition. It raises certain question marks on whether it was a demolition or whether it was actually collapsed because of the plane. Because many reports say that no matter how hot the fire or the explosion generate, these are steel beams that's holding up the building. It doesn't collapse that way. But some can argue that it can, and even though like I haven't seen anything conclusive to say that supporting that a building can just like fall down just like that, at least in my books, I'm not convinced. But do you know that not only the Twin Towers went down that day, but World Tower 7 also came down? I didn't. And remember, I was watching the news, I was glued to the TV, the whole, not just the whole day in September 11, but the days and weeks after. I was watching the TV like glued to it. And I did visit New York like within like a couple of weeks when they opened up the airport, and I could still see the ashes everywhere around the Twin Towers. And when I visited the demolition site, or well, not the demolition site, around the Twin Tower, they call it Ground Zero, I didn't go and visit Tower 7 because on that day, a third tower went down. World Trade Center Tower number 7, that's what they call it. It went down. Tower 7 went down. But how many people know about it? Especially the unawakened ones. I mean, even when we awaken, with level of awakening that we go through. And some people that's awakening, they may not be exposed to the news. They may choose not to watch the news, and that's okay too. So there's not a competition. But I'm just saying that I didn't know for a long time Tower 7 went down. And most people I talk to, they don't know Tower 7 went down, regardless of whether they live in Australia or the United States or different parts of the world. Tower 7 is not like a shop building. It's not like a house. It's a big ass tower. It went down. Nobody knew about it. Why? Was it covered in the news? I don't know. But more importantly, how did it go down? How could a tower, no plane hit it? There's no shrapnels or something that legitimately you can say that it causes. To this date, it's a big question mark, but yet it goes down. Prior to this podcast, I'm going to get sidetracked a little. I was listening to the audiobook, The Real Anthony Fauci by Dr. Robert Kennedy. And it talks about the beneficial use of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine to basically early prevention or early treatment of COVID. And I wonder how many people know about the case studies in different parts of the world that have been using especially ivermectin effectively. Maybe they don't know. But whether like ivermectin worked or not, compared to World Tower 7 going down, if World Tower is a physical building, a big ass building going down, and nobody knows about it, or nobody really question it, a pill that whether it's been health is something that is, to me, is a bit more subjective, because what works on one person is not guaranteed to work on another person. Even like if it's 99% of the time, it's not, you can say that 1% is anomaly. But when Tower 7 going down, like the whole building went down, you can't argue with that. So if something is so obvious not being questioned, what's happening around the world today not being questioned by a certain group of society, am I that surprised? No. Am I still stunned by it though? Yeah, still kind of. Knowing is one thing, but seeing it and experiencing it is another. But that's our life journey. Not to mention, like when you look at other stuff that happened around September 11, the Pentagon, there's a lot of reports, there's no signs of planes and wreckages of plane. Like the black box is never been found from September 11, from the 2 flights going to the World Trade Center, and also the one going to the Pentagon is missing. And prior to that, the only black box that has gone missing is only one flight, and that's crashed extremely high up in the Andes mountain. So usually when a plane crashes, you find the black box and you listen to what's going on. But funny enough, like in the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, the black boxes are just not found. So then it led the US to fight in the Afghan war, which the US spent a lot of money. It was upwards of $1 trillion. And then eventually, not long after that, the Iraq war is recovered. And the reason for that, we all remember is the weapon of mass destruction, which was never found.
The Iran-Iraq war, no smoking gun here. But U.S. investigators are eager to find one, and discovering weapons of mass destruction is an even higher priority. The U.S. team choppers off to keep up the search.
Because again, we're building this Iraq and Saddam as this bad guy, and we are the white knight and a savior. And when I say we, as in the Western United Nations allies, so we go and invade countries like to restore democracy and eradicate the bad guys because they're carrying weapons. And that was the excuse or the reason we used to invade a country. Where was the weapon of mass destruction? And when you really look into it, following from episode 1, follow the money trail, why was Iraq like being invaded?
Then there was 9/11. Within days, George W. Bush, then US president, had told his generals to plan for a possible war in Iraq.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil.
The White House repeatedly tried to connect Iraq to the 9/11 attacks, though those links later proved false.
In October 2000, it was no longer selling oil in US dollars. US was the world currency. We talked about in episode 1. If you haven't watched it, just follow the show notes and you'll see the links first episode. But Iraq being the first country to really wanting to not sell oil in the US dollars. And at the time, Iraq was the top 6 largest oil producer in the world. By February 2003, Iraq has sold over 3 billion barrels of oil for 26 billion euros. So a month later, US invaded Iraq. How convenient. Because imagine that. What if Iraq continued to sell oil not using the US currency, which is the world currency, with no consequences? And subsequently, other countries could say, well, maybe I don't need to hold US currency. I don't need to sell US currency. I don't need to listen to the US and please the US and do as they say, because I'm not relying on the US dollars anymore. And they all move away from that. Then the US dollars weaken its position and dominance over the world because you can't just print money anymore. This currency is going to collapse because they keep printing. We're not going to hold it. We're not going to trade with it. It's still a disaster. So Iraq got invaded. And after the invasion, Iraq has gone back to selling oil in guess which currency? Yes, the US dollars. And I quote, former head of US operation in Iraq, General Abi said, of course it's about oil. We can't deny that. Former head Alan Greenspan wrote in his memoir, I'm saddened that it's politically inconvenient to acknowledge what everyone knows. The Iraq war is largely about oil. Former US Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel said, people say we're not fighting for oil. Of course we are. So if you believe what I just said, and on surface level, and you can do your own research, but what I presented, these are easy to find information on Google, on everywhere on the internet. These are factual information. If what I said is accurate, then you start to question the whole mainstream media and the government is singing the same song. Now it goes into attacking countries, saying that on the falsehood of weapon of mass destruction. But if it's truly about oil and forcing them back to sell oil in the US currency and retaining control of the whole money supply and the world currency, what else is the government up to so that it can stay in control? And you look at the history of oil wars, recent history. Venezuela is the largest oil producer in the world, and it was about to do the same and sell oil in euros instead of the US dollars. General Chavez, which is anti-US and condemned the war on Iraq. And to me, part of me can resonate because you cannot meet terror with terror. If someone killed someone and you become revengeful and kill that person back, and we've seen it in movies, when is the killing gonna stop? So I'm not advocating for people to just get away with murder and get away with attacking other people with no consequences, but we need to think more about like some of our actions. And when I say we, it's like I was supportive of invading Afghanistan and Iraq. I was a big fan of it. But now that I'm slightly more conscious, like there are other choices that we could make. So again, what this episode is, I'm going to go on a little bit more on some of the things that I discovered. But it's not about like educating our audience and sharing with you guys some of my shocking discovery and try to convince you, hey, this is the truth. But it's just sharing my journey. It's like how difficult it was for me to accept what I thought I knew of how this world works and what are the good guys and bad guys. That was actually the foundation of what I see as truth. It was on very, very shaky foundation. If you can't trust the news, if you can't trust the government, and if you have question mark over the education system, because it is largely governed by the government on what they can teach, then what can you trust on all these years on what you've learned, right? And even with TV and Hollywood, like a lot of what we learn is from TV and books. So General Chavez is anti-US. In 2002, based on CIA documents obtained from the Freedom of Information Act, showed the US backed a coup against Chavez. The money trail showing from the US to Chavez opposition. The new president, Carmona, had visited US just months before. So they basically backed an opposition to overthrow the Chavez government because he was trying to sell oil not using the US currency, using euros. Again, that's a big threat to financial hold in this world. And if you lose financial hold, you lose control. Libya is the largest oil producer in Africa. It had tons of gold and silver in reserve, was on track to be the most influential country in Africa. Gaddafi is the leader of the Libya and then president of the African Union, suggested the states of African continent to switch to the new currency independent of the US dollars, the gold dinar. Countries such as Nigeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and Angola were ready to change the currency. However, in 2011, the NATO-led coalition began a military intervention in Libya in the name of freedom.
But at this stage, the US retains control of broader military operations by the international coalition. Are two centers of command and control viable? And is this division in responsibility a reflection of differences about exactly what is mandated by the UN Security Council resolution on Libya?
In the 20th of August 2011, Gaddafi was executed by opposition militias backed by NATO drone strikes. And I remember I didn't follow what happened to General Gaddafi as closely as what happened to Iraq and Afghanistan. But I remember the media like painting Gaddafi as a bad guy. And I'm not saying that Gaddafi is some sort of saint. But again, like anyone that wanting to move away, selling oil in the US currency, get taken out. And all in the war of freedom versus evil, that was the whole narrative in the mainstream. And I believe like Gaddafi is evil. Again, I'm not excusing some of his other action, but if US and the NATO-led coalition was about freedom, some of his allies, like the Saudi, has a pretty bad track record of human rights. But because it's kind of selling oil in the US currency, kind of allied to US, it's been turned a blind eye on. So you have to think about it. Like, is it really about human rights? Is it really about freedom? And the list of countries, it continues, like from Chile in 1973, overthrowing the government, to Cambodia, to Laos, to Vietnam, to East Timor. Like generally, like from the inside that's come out to share the information on the black ops type of operation. You probably like see it in movies, but generally they negotiate with the leader of those countries to try to get them on side with the US ally. And if that doesn't work, they try to bribe them, like, let me give you certain benefits either to that person directly or to the countries, trade benefits, sometimes both for the individual and also for the country. And if that doesn't work, they try to organize like that person to be overthrown. And if that doesn't work, they try to assassinate. And according to the sources that revealed what happened in Iraq, because none of those four methods worked with Saddam Hussein, and Saddam has a pretty good security forces that's protecting him from assassination attempts. The last resort is declaring war.
American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war.
And finding a silver lining, a silver bullet to aim at those countries to say that, hey, this is the reason that we're going to go on war. So looking at the surface, like, of why we go to the war, and yeah, you can say the Taliban are bad people, and the Al-Qaeda are bad, and Gaddafi is bad, Saddam is bad. And again, I'm not justifying any of the actions and what they've done in terms of human rights. And I think a lot of them, their actions and how they treat their citizen is appalling. But again, we're looking at the real reason why these wars are being declared. George Bush Jr. says we will not accept states that harbor, finance, train, or equip the agents of terror. Those nations that violate this will be regarded as hostile regime. For years in Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden was recognized by Washington as a good terrorist. America backed Mujahideen Afghan warlords, provided an estimated $3 billion in arms. I remember watching Rambo 3, it's probably when I was growing up, it was one of my favorite movies, watching Sylvester Stallone and shooting all the bad guys and helping out fighting the holy war. And yeah, those were the Taliban. They were helping the US because they didn't want Russia to basically take control of that region. The United States viewed the conflict in Afghanistan as an integral Cold War struggle, and the CIA provided assistance to anti-Soviet Mujahideen rebels. Out of this came the Taliban, the Al-Qaeda. Taliban was working with the Clinton administration, building oil pipeline. This is, the Taliban are friends with the US. Opium trade restarted. Its opium production surged from 180 tons in 2001 to more than 3,000 tons, from 180 to 3,000 tons a year after the invasion, and to more than 8,000 by 2007. So 6-7 years after the invasion, it went from 180 tons to 8,000 tons of opium. And I didn't know, I was naive. But opium is actually what produces heroin, one of the deadliest illegal drugs, synthetic drugs out there in the marketplace. And the US employed warlords to fight the Taliban in return when they lost control. The warlords have a significant history of brutality. So let's go back to what George Bush Jr. said. We will not accept states that harbor, finance, train, or equip the agents of terror. Those nations that violate this, we will regard as hostile regime. Well, can I call George Bush Jr. a president, dude? Well, the nation is harboring, is financing, is training, and equipping those agents of terror. So on one hand, you're saying you can't, you're not going to support them, these terrorists, but on the other hand, you also supported these same terrorists. Isn't that kind of ironic or hypocritical? A report from Amnesty International in 2014 confirmed thousands of torturers given safe haven in America. Many of them, the training was provided in Georgia, USA. Approximately 1,000 men, women, and children, including infants and the elderly, were slaughtered by a Salvadorian battalion in El Mozote and surrounding villages over a period of days in December 1981. The soldiers were trained by the US and came with American rifles. Look, again, there's certain evidence that US are training terrorists. That is assisting US in controlling the parts of the region that it wants certain regime and certain ideology instilled, including controlling of the US dollars and controlling who's in charge. The US is not truly interested in the human rights. Most of the biological weapons of Iraq were supplied by the US as per a congressional report. So on one hand, you're saying that it's wrong to have a weapon of mass destruction. On the other hand, you were the one actually supplied to them. It's almost like calling out a kid in the playground, holding a knife or a gun and saying, you are so wrong to be holding that weapon, but you are the parents that actually gave the kid the gun or the knife. So I'm not saying any of this is right, not excusing the kid or that's holding the gun or the country that's threatening to use these weapons. But again, like just seeing from a grander perspective, there's more to the truth. So when I started realizing that, again, how my understanding of what this world, how this world really operates, it was standing on really shaky ground. It was like standing on apple pie, ready to crumble down. Right now, I could say these things with a degree of lightheartedness because it's been so many years since it hasn't been that long, but at least had a few years under the bridge since I first discovered this. And there's no laughing matter because there's people that's dying from this. So one of the things that we haven't respected is the sovereign law of those places. And if we actually stop invading countries, say for example in World War II, all the wasted resources spent on that war could have provided for every human need on the planet. But rather than dwelling on the past, maybe we didn't come down into this planet just to be all loving and caring and to be kind. Maybe we came into wanting to experience the duality. So I think we've had enough of this revelation that I've shared today. I want to share more about how do we awake and accept and move into transcending these discoveries? How do we make sense and find peace from all this? And one of the things I really admire the teachings of Byron Katie is just accepting what is. It is what it is. And if you argue with reality, you're going to be wrong 100% of the time. What do I mean by that? Well, we did invade Iraq. You say it shouldn't have happened? Well, it did happen. That's reality. How are we clever enough to say that it shouldn't have happened? Some of our greatest tragedy or traumas, it also became our greatest gift, our greatest learning, our greatest growth, our greatest awakening. So on one hand, we don't want it to happen, and it's cruel for that to happen from one lens. But on the other lens, we just don't know. Who's to say that before we reincarnated, we didn't choose for this to happen, to experience duality? Since in our discussion, we can see it from a more elevated perspective, but we still have our blankets on. Who's to say who's truly good and who's truly bad? From my experience, most people that I've met, whether they're working for the government, for the military, the police force, everyone's trying to do the best that they can to look after themselves, to look after their family, their loved ones. And if they're capable of looking after that, they extend beyond that to the community, to the city, to the country. And so even Hitler, based on the channeling work of the Law of One, he talks about that he didn't qualify on the path of service to self, which is you need to be over 95% focusing on just me. He didn't qualify. Even though it seems like Hitler is so egocentric, it's all about himself and building this empire and war machine to further his own agenda. Because based on the channeling work of Law 1, he truly believes he was helping the German as a nation, his country, to build a better future. And one thing I'd like to also challenge our own belief on, when have we behaved the same? In terms of if what I said is the hinge of truth, and you resonate with okay, we're trying to control the situation, we're trying to control the currency, we're trying to eradicate certain leaders and that is not singing the same tunes that we want to sing. But when have we done the same? When have we tried to manipulate others or when I say manipulate it, try to use creative forces, persuasive arguments or expression to get people to do things the way that we want our world to operate within? And if we have done that on the smaller scale, whether it's to our friends, the immediate friends or family or co-workers, or in the business arena, these people, they just have done it on a larger scale. Because as a president of the country or as a leader of the country, those are the same decisions you try to make. How do you change the agenda more so what's to your favor? So if we're guilty of even to the kids, hey, maybe if you go to bed early, I'm going to do this to you, to try to manipulate the situation so they could obey or listen. Well, that's still kind of I know there's different scale, but that's who's to say that we are not capable of doing it in a grander scale. If we live in the same path those leaders that eventually make those decisions to invade those countries have made. We don't know until we live every day, every minute in that person's shoes. We may be making the same decision. And who's to say life is not just one big dream or play that's just being acted out? Hence the saying that don't take life so seriously. I just had lunch with a friend and I was just saying today that life is just all an experience. You don't know what is truly good unless there's bad. If all the meals that you've taken is all the same, then there's nothing good, nothing bad. They can only be bad if that's good. And this is 3D. It's about duality. We needed good and bad. And one perspective is that I'm just grateful that we get to act as this love and light on this like good guy, benevolent side. And somebody volunteered to be on this benevolence, this bad or this evil side. Because in this lifetime, definitely that's not the side I want to be at. And if you're watching this podcast or listening to it, I'm guessing that's not the side that you want to be at. It's just like in schoolyard play, cops and robbers. Which side do you want to be on? We've chosen a side. And if nobody wanted to play robbers, we wouldn't be able to play this game of duality. Someone volunteered, and I'm glad that's not us. Another big thing I've learned from Byron Katie is that you cannot resolve conflict and war between countries if you can't even find peace from within. So if some of the things that either through this podcast or you already knew about these wars and a lot of big question mark on why, how could we invade countries and hurt countless number of people on like basically no good reasons, except for wanting more control, more power. Well, if we can't find peace from within and understand the logic or the grander perspective with all that, then we can't expect countries and nations to find peace in this world. When you have more people, you have different ideology, different belief system, different values, different level of consciousness. With more opposite or differing values and belief and consciousness, obviously you're going to have conflict. So the most important thing, or the first part of call I find is keep asking yourself this question: what do I need to do to find the peace from within? Despite what goes on with all this war that's been going on, and not just war, with especially what's going on around the globally right now with the pandemic and different agenda that's been rolled out, mandatory this, mandatory that, and whatever secret agenda that's been pushed out. What about just trusting that everything is happening for a reason? And again, not saying that you don't do what you think is right for you and your role to protect yourself or to maximize your experience for your lifetime, but I'm talking about inner peace. Every decision that we make, or as many decisions we make as possible, we do it out of love and faith rather than out of fear. One of the things I've learned from my days in gardening, shed another perspective for you, is what is good, what is bad. When I'm killing many aphids and caterpillar and slugs in my garden that's eating up some of my veggie crops, am I the bad guy now? Because I'm sure to those bugs and insects, I'm the bad guy. I'm slaughtering a lot of their buddies, their family. The point is, don't be too quick to judge. Understand that often there's a greater perspective that we may not yet fully understand. The only person that we can control is ourselves. The more that we focus on raising our own consciousness, our vibration and frequency automatically rip out to the people around us. Think about when you're in a room or in a restaurant or in a shop or in an office, very often that you'll find people that lift up the energy of the room, right? You look forward to their appearance. And there's certain people that walks in the room, they sap the energy out. And there's certain people like they're neutral. The more that we could build ourselves a level of consciousness to be energetically lifting the people around us, the more people that raises our own consciousness, the more that we lift our vibration, the more the people will get sane in choosing peace and love over war. Conversely, if we go on marching, anti-war march, but yet inside is raging with hatred, and how could this be, and unjust, and judgment on the other side, even though it's about peace protesting, but when you carry the energy, we're not being conscious. And if we're driven by fear, this shouldn't have to happen, it couldn't have happened, then it defeats the whole purpose of the peace rally. And I'm not saying that the peace rally shouldn't have happened, but when the peace rally happened, if you're coming from a place of love, of oneness, of togetherness, it's a different energy. So it's not so much about the external action. It's more so whatever that we do, it's about raising our level of consciousness, and the highest vibration is love. And so to this, I love that you actually stayed and listened to the whole podcast, and sincerely appreciate you and love you. And I've been missing action for quite a few months because the universe told me to take a break, and I have. So I'm grateful that I'm back. I'm grateful I'm reconnecting with you. And if whatever resonates and you haven't subscribed to this podcast, subscribe to it. And I look forward to sharing chapter 3 with you, episode 3 with you. It's going to be good. Love you. Take care.